Howdy, everyone. Christine here with the Texas Blockcast, and I am joined today by Dan Morrison with Amalgamated Sludge, a vertically integrated natural gas producer, Bitcoin miner. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Christine.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation because you're very unique in the space because you're really basically a one-man show in starting up Bitcoin mining on your oil and gas site. So I want to just kind of start from the beginning, learn a little bit about you and what brought you to this point, and then maybe dig into the details of how would one go about doing this.
Okay, yeah, sure. I started my career as a reservoir engineer with Exxon a long time ago, 1987. And Exxon had just done its first ever layoff in 1986. Fortunately, they had the practice of continuing to hire people even though they didn't need them.
And you were one of those people?
I was one of those people, lucky enough. So I started with Exxon in Midland, did some time in Houston, went to work for a company in Dallas called Merit Energy, which is now one of the larger private E&P companies in the country. And then made a shift from Merit to the financial world, doing sell-side research.
Very interesting.
Always thought I wanted to be an investment banker.
Yeah.
And back then, sell-side research analysts got to do some investment banking along the way before Spitzer messed that up. So I did financial world stuff and research, hedge funds, really up until about 2014, and came back into the industry in management of a company that was on a track to go public. That was right ahead of the 14-15 crash and bankruptcy cycle. So long story, helped that company get through bankruptcy, came back later to help run it and sell it, and then started looking for something new to do, and had done a little help for some guys who were trying to do flare gas mining, which we'll talk more about for Bitcoin with flare gas. And it was just a consulting role, but I got to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin. Started going to meetups and conferences and just kind of absorbing as much as I could. And the community is great that way.
Yes.
I mean, it's really an open bunch of folks.
It really is
phenomenal.
Like a family reunion every event.
And oil and gas has always been a little bit contrast that to pure tech, right? Where you have to have an NDA signed to have a cup of coffee with somebody. Oil and gas has always been more open, kind of because the competition's there, but it's harder to compete.
Yeah. You can't just go and do it if you don't have any skills.
There's competition for acreage and acquisitions, but people are also, open about talking about what they do, and more so in oil and gas than regular tech. And Bitcoin's kind of more oil and gas atmosphere that way.
Sure.
Common cause and
pioneering.
Everyone's solving the same kind of problems.
Yeah.
And there's not much that's proprietary out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody's boat goes up when Bitcoin goes up. And so camaraderie and sharing of. And
there's a little bit, there is competition in the sense that we're all competing in the same giant network for hash rate, right? But it's your competition that you're talking to is so small. It's kind of, you'll get more out of collaborating with people than not.
Well, and with off-grid flare gas, which we'll get into a little later, the details of that, but that's an even more elite pool of people.
Yes.
Most of the people are on-grid.
Correct. And to wrap that up, so got curious about Bitcoin, really just the mining mechanics of it. And through the whole process, there's kind of a parallel track of the technology of mining and how that works, and then Bitcoin itself and my growing appreciation for it as an asset and what it does for the economy long term. So those kind of were two parallel tracks my learning process was going down.
So you went from oil and gas to private equity investment, but then knowing about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining specifically, is that what brought you back?
No, I had sold a company for some credit investors and was just looking for something to do. So
a new project.
Yeah. And in my business, you always look at what's on the market to buy and assets. There's a pretty robust asset market, and you can, everyone's selling properties all the time. So we're constantly looking at those.
Yeah.
And one came across after I'd spent enough time looking at Bitcoin. I'm like, that's kind of perfect for this.
So when you identified the space, and is this when Amalgamated Sludge, your company, was created for that particular asset?
I started that company just as a shell to do something with.
Okay.
After I sold the last company. So it's like, I like the name. There was, back in the day, a distressed credit buyer who was buying bad oil and gas loans, to work them out and stuff. This was back in the 90s. But it was called Amalgamated Sludge because he's putting together all these messy companies. So I was like, that's a great name. I have to use it someday.
It was so memorable when I met you. I never forgot it. I was like, oh, that's the Amalgamated Sludge guy.
Yeah, so it's sludge. I mean, there's lots that you can do with the name. And that's actually how we operate in New Mexico, is Amalgamated Sludge.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your asset.
So we own about 55 producing wells in Chavez and Eddy counties of New Mexico, along with a gathering system and pipeline assets and a processing plant. We can talk about how each of those is key to the Bitcoin equation. We call it the fringe of the fringe. The popular term in oil and gas is the core of the core. That's where everyone wants to be.
Yeah.
We're in the fringe
You're
of the fringe.
As if Bitcoin isn't fringe enough.
Right, yeah. Double the fringe.
The fringe of the fringe of the fringe.
So, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, I've thought about it. It's like, people are like, have you borrowed any money? It's like, I've got really lousy oil and gas assets and Bitcoin mining operation. Who wants to lend on that? It's like two cats don't make a dog.
I have to say, this is one of the reasons why the meetups are so fun, though, because it's washed out all the people that are just there to get rich, and it's all of the true believers.
Yeah. Well, it's I still don't, I have a soft spot in my heart for the guys who show up and they go, I want to go, tell me how to go find some flare gas and mine Bitcoin. Like, it's a long line over here. It's easy. It's an easy concept. Everyone gets the concept.
Right.
It's that execution and making it happen it's challenging.
Right.
Like everything. It's like,
right. And as we were talking earlier before the show, that it's it's much easier for a oil and gas person to move to Bitcoin mining as an additional vertical addition, but not so easy for the Bitcoin miners to just jump into
oil and gas.
Right. You don't have the experience.
I mean, we'll talk more, but Bitcoin's basically supplying electricity to run and networking a bunch of computers. So and I did it. It's like anyone can do it. So it's not that hard. And there are degrees to that. I'm probably an 85 to 90% guy on the Bitcoin side. There's a whole lot more efficiency to squeeze out by these really brilliant people who do firmware and operating controls. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to squeeze more juice out of that lemon. But it's still relatively basic. Oil and gas encompasses accounting, legal work, the operational technical stuff. There's just a lot more to that business to try to get into that business. If you have a place to plug in your computers, you're mining. And it's like, it's got to be low cost, and there's all those kinds of things. But if you can just find a place to plug them in and park them, you're good to go. If setting up, running, buying oil and gas assets is challenging.
Yeah. So let's go back then to your property and the dynamics of it and what makes it good for Bitcoin mining. You're doing gas, not oil?
Not oil. So we have a little bit of oil production that comes along. You never are, or rarely are you purely one or the other. There's always a little bit of mixture.
Okay. But I'm assuming they're old oil wells that just have a lot of the gas still around?
They were drilled as gas wells in 08.
Okay.
I mean, 06 to 08. We drilled, or the predecessor drilled some of the first horizontal wells in the Permian, are the wells that we operate.
Wow.
Which isn't, and they were drilled for gas in 06 to 08 was a very high gas market.
Okay.
And fringe of the fringe, we're up where the Wolfcamp's very shallow.
Yeah.
And it would have worked at $8 gas that they were seeing back then.
Yeah.
It doesn't work at $2 gas.
Okay.
So as a development, it kind of ran its course through 08, but they had built a lot of infrastructure, a lot of systems that we were able to pick up as part of the acquisition.
And help our listeners understand the dynamics there about pricing and location and distance from the market? What made this particular asset desirable? Sounds like you were looking for a place that you could do some Bitcoin mining. What was it about the specs about this particular property that drew you?
So Bitcoin mining has two big cost inputs. The capital cost of the equipment, which we'll talk about how that swings around, and the cost of your power. So, and those are the two big economic drivers in Bitcoin mining. Cost of the power, if you're off grid, boils down to the cost of the fuel you're going to burn to generate power. And natural gas in this region has a chronic disadvantage. It's just a chronic disadvantage to the rest of the market because of the infrastructure that's in place and the activity that's going on.
Okay, explain that a little more.
So gas has to be transported by pipeline. There's no other economic way to do it. So the activity in this area is dominated by oil production and oil drilling. Like I said earlier, that brings with it some gas. And in the case of this particular area, lots of gas. Because these are some of the most prolific oil wells in the basin or in the country. Not where I'm at. I'm on the Fringe. A little further south of me, but we're going into the same pipeline systems. And
Okay, so they're all trying to get all that gas into one pipeline.
Well, it's multiple pipelines, but a pipeline network.
Sure.
But it all kind of channels through a point called Waha. So Waha gets really, really bad pricing. And everyone who's feeding into Waha gets really, really bad pricing because there's just too much gas.
Sure.
And you don't have the traditional economic signal of low price, curtail supply.
Yeah.
Because the supply is associated with the oil production.
Yeah.
So the oil guys don't care about the gas price.
Right, because otherwise they're just flaring it or venting it.
Or selling it for 50 cents. You know, it's kind of, they kind of don't care
they
about
don't
the
have
price.
a lot of great options. They're just there for the oil.
Right. But that just drives the price down for anyone who's trying to sell gas into that market. But it's good for someone who's trying to buy gas in that market.
Yes.
So it's a chronically discounted price for your fuel source for mining as a Bitcoin miner. As a gas producer, and I'm still a net long gas producer.
Okay.
It's bad.
Yes.
Because I'm having to deal with low prices.
Yeah, with Bitcoin mining, the one with the lowest cost of power wins.
Right.
And you can't really beat some of that off-grid stuff when there's no other place for that gas to go. So you're doing natural gas, but you're also doing Bitcoin mining. What percentage is with gas and what percentage is with the Bitcoin mining?
So back to the prior comment, capital's the other big piece of this, right? So we've only funded an initial mining development with about 400 kW, which consumes a little less than 8% of my total gas production.
Okay.
So I've got a lot of room to expand.
You got 92%, and you're selling that back
into a pipeline system. Yeah.
Theoretically, could you shut off the Bitcoin mining if it was more profitable? Okay.
Oh yeah. And as a practical matter, there's several other nuances of Bitcoin that are very attractive to oil and gas guys that this kind of starts to highlight. So as a practical matter, yes, I can turn it off and on.
Right.
Really in minutes, actually, which is kind of fascinating. Turning it back on, I use a particular brand of miner called Watts Miners by MicroBT. They take a little time to spin up, so they don't come back on instantly.
Okay.
About 23 minutes. But it's pretty quick. But I don't have to take my Bitcoin price that I produce on a given day because I've got other cash flow coming from the gas operation. A lot less now, but I still have cash flow. As a producer, I made the comment earlier, there's only one way to transport gas, and that's through a pipeline. But when I burn it in a generator and produce Bitcoin with it, now I've turned it into an asset that I can store.
Right.
Indefinitely.
Digital energy,
and sell it when I want at a price I want.
Are you selling a lot of it, or are you mostly hodling it?
Just stacking it.
And what about looking into the future? Are you hoping to increase the Bitcoin proportion of your business?
Yeah. I mean, I've got enough capacity for gas to do, quadruple or almost tenfold my production. And then my assets I do like the vertical integration aspect of it, and not being a single revenue source miner.
Diversified.
It's hard. I mean, these big industrial guys can do it because they've got scale, and they sell a lot of Bitcoin to do that.
Yeah.
Small guys, it's very hard to just mine Bitcoin and have that be your only source of revenue.
Yeah.
I prefer, back to the long-term goal of accumulating Bitcoin rather than just producing it to sell it. So I'll grow my mining operation at a scale that I can always fund operations out of cash flow, and really use the Bitcoin mining as a way to just stack for the most part. I mean, not to say I won't get sucked into just doing a whole lot more mining and selling Bitcoin ultimately.
Spoken like a true Bitcoiner.
Yeah. Well,
Diamond hands.
Yeah.
Never going to sell.
It's all kind of timing and opportunity. There's another big parallel, or a big parallel between Bitcoin and oil and gas, is the cyclicality of it.
Yes, with both of them, the price, action, volatility.
The capital equipment costs swing around with prices. So you kind of need to be in a position to zig when everyone else is zagging.
Yeah.
And so to stay in position to take advantage of those moves is kind of critical. So that's kind of what I've tried to do. I've learned a lot for my first year of operation. It's like,
I bet. So tell us a little bit more about the mechanics of it. You bring a generator out and plop it down on the wellhead and turn that into power.
So you have to deliver the gas to the generator, right? So in the case of we'll just talk about a flare, for example. That's going to be a central point called a tank battery, typically. Maybe it's at a single wellhead. So that's gas that's coming together in one spot at a certain volume, and you can run that through a generator to generate power. I'm fortunate I have a gathering system that connects 35 of my 55 wells together and delivers all that gas to one central point where I can use as much of that as I need to mine. So yes, you get the gas at one point, you set a natural gas fired generator that's going to run and generate your power, and then in my instance, in most, you set up what's a modular data center, which is they all look like shipping containers.
Yeah,
whether
like
they
a
started,
sea can out there.
yeah, you started as a shipping container, or they've made it look like one, and it's just full of
Computers.
of servers and
Air cooled.
air cooled in my instance, and that's just moving enough air to feed the little machines fresh air. They can run in pretty hot environments, up to like 105 or something like that. Above that, they start to slow down. So you're not as efficient at really higher temps, which I get a lot of.
So there may be possibilities as you expand of moving more toward immersion. Would that solve the problem?
It wouldn't. It's a whole different, that's where it's not as simple. I made the comment earlier, it's like just plugging in a bunch of computers and networking.
Yeah.
Immersion's a whole different animal. That's a little more complicated. But in my environment, southeast New Mexico, high desert, it's an extension of the Sonoran Desert, basically. So it's hot and dusty. And immersion's probably where I need to be pointed.
Very interesting. Now, tell us about the setup process. Was it difficult to get it approved? If you're an oil and gas owner, what would the process be if you wanted to add a little diversification by doing some Bitcoin mining?
So if you're an oil and gas owner, one of the things that people don't really jump to, most oil and gas guys do, but Bitcoin guys miss this one, is you have to have access to the surface for that purpose.
Okay.
Standard oil and gas lease grants the operator the right to do oil and gas stuff. You can't set up a tattoo parlor. Maybe. Depends on your lease. You got to read the terms. But most of them won't accommodate a Bitcoin mining operation. So you need to work with your landowner to get a surface use agreement, or make sure you have the right to do that from a surface use perspective. In my instance, I'm fortunate to own like 40 acres of surface in fee, so we can do kind of whatever we want out there within reason. So that's step one.
Okay.
Step two is, do you truly have the right to use your gas for that purpose? So
is it possible that could be not allowed?
Correct. So a lot of producers, whether they did it themselves or they bought assets that were encumbered with these agreements, may have a gas gathering agreement in place that dedicates that gas to the pipeline company or to the gathering company.
Okay.
So when I was kind of early on helping people kick this around, that was something people tripped over a lot. And they didn't realize they had it because maybe they bought some oil wells that have some gas production that's getting flared.
Wow.
They want to do some Bitcoin mining. Oops, that gas actually is dedicated to the midstream company. The fact that they're not taking it and you're having to flare it sucks, but they still have the right to take it. So you really have to get their permission to get out of that agreement in some capacity. And then you may not have that. I mean, older production may have had those dedications that have long since expired. But
are there people that someone could go to help walk them through that?
Yeah, it's just a matter of reading your gas contracts and kind of know what you've got. And again, a lot of guys that don't, they're mainly oil guys, but they have this gas they're having to flare. They may not have ever looked at that gas agreement. And I've talked to companies that have done a large acquisition and they find stuff that's actually been dedicated twice. So it gets messy on that side.
And then so once you know that you can use the surface rights, what about the permitting?
So it's all about permitting the generating equipment. So in most states, it's a fairly standard process and it's required to get an air quality permit to run an industrial engine that's in a semi-permanent installation. A lot of people think most states' rules have an exclusion for temporary. So it's like, if it's on wheels, no, if it's parked there. If it's parked there for more than 6 months, it doesn't matter if it's got wheels on it or not.
Okay.
So you have to get a permit that lets you operate whatever size and type of generator you've got. Again, most states, that's not a big deal. It's kind of I'd say most oil and gas states, it's not. California, a little longer
big
process.
Deal.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of Bitcoin mining going on out there?
No, probably zero, actually.
Wow.
That's right, a little bit.
Although I have heard of people wanting to use the methane from cows and waste. So
yeah,
maybe more openness in that, but maybe not the.
I kicked around with when I was consulting for some guys, some flare gas opportunities, and we didn't get very far down the road, but even that was just daunting.
Wow. What about sour gas situation? So is it a particular kind of generator? Is that something that you have to deal with, the type of gas in that area?
So back to your hypothetical operator who's going to...
Yeah.
So one of the things, once you've got the right to do it on the surface and have access to the gas legally, contractually, what kind of quality of gas do you have?
Right.
And it has to be something that'll burn in a generator and not destroy the generator. So in West Texas, Permian Basin broadly, common problems, hydrogen sulfide, H2S, which can get to pretty high concentrations. There's two big engine categories, reciprocating and turbine. Reciprocating engines generally aren't going to take that up to anything above about 100 ppm, maybe 60. Could you get comfortable running through a generator, and you're still going to be kind of rolling the dice on excessive wear that's caused by the hydrogen sulfide. Turbines, most of them advertise taking up to 20,000 ppm, which is a lot.
Okay.
But no one's really rolled the dice on that because it's an expensive piece of equipment. And if it doesn't work out,
you just destroyed an expensive piece of equipment.
Right. So there's actually a pilot going on right now in the Permian, Texas side. A guy I'll give him a shout out, Paul Cochran with Verde, is running a sour gas pilot on turbines. If that works, that's going to be kind of a proof case. He's the guy who's running out in front on that charge. But so it's quality of gas. You got to have something you can burn in an engine, or you have to treat it to a level that you can burn it in an engine.
Okay. Again, the creativity of the space, like people working to make it better and sharing with one another and growing the whole industry. And it sounds like, what are the numbers of people actually using off-grid stranded gas to do Bitcoin mining?
I don't know what the number is on the flare gas side. So the flare gas is kind of an obvious use case, right?
Right.
I'm burning gas in a flare.
Spending money to get rid of it already. Why not use it?
I can't induce a pipeline to come get it.
Yeah.
Or there's just not one around. So why not run it through a generator and do something with the power?
Yeah.
Like mine Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the obvious use case. It has all those regulatory and legal trips you have to get past to make that work, but it's getting done. That's getting done a lot in North Dakota, increasingly in Texas.
And people like yourself are pioneering it and helping others walk through the process to
a little
speed
bit.
it up.
I'm a little different because I'm not doing flare gas, so I'm a little weird. I'm just
fringe.
I'm a little back to the fringe of the fringe. I've just taken gas that has a really lousy market.
Okay.
And I'm now accessing a much better market through Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
The term digital pipeline gets used a lot, and it really is kind of a midstream solution.
Mm-hmm.
Back to you really have to transport gas through a pipeline, or I can use it on site for something else.
Right.
And this something else is running a data center to mine Bitcoin.
It's such a beautiful use case for a very real problem that we have with there's too much gas. Mm-hmm. And even where there is a pipeline out that way, there's so much that we're trying to put in these pipelines that you can't even get it all in there. You were telling me that like there's times when they're like pipeline's full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the pipelines will issue what's called an operational flow order.
Okay.
And that's to the shippers on their pipeline. And as a producer, you're probably selling to a shipper.
Yeah.
You're really not doing this pipeline nomination stuff yourself. You're selling to a marketing company who's doing that. But they will get an order from the pipeline. It's like, no room at the inn.
Wow.
You got to shut in.
In which case, what do? You
Start
shutting it. Okay.
Just quit producing.
So it's such an obvious solution, and another stream of income, or if you're a Bitcoiner and you're going to hodl forever. How has the reception been amongst oil and gas? Is the word spreading?
It's starting to. So last year, the natural gas market had a really good year. It was,
yeah.
We had Freeport online. You had the stuff going on in Europe driving up LNG prices. Yeah. We were at a lull coming out of COVID on drilling activity in the Permian. That was just kind of ramping up to stuff the pipelines. So everything was moving easily, and prices got to like $8. And we were actually realizing those high prices and even on the fringe of the fringe. But as the industry does, everything's, Freeport blew up, literally. Europe took its huge swing back down in pricing, and then the Permian drillers ramped up, and we've stuffed the pipes again. So in a very short order, we went from being very short gas to being oversupplied with gas in the U.S., which is crazy. But Bitcoin kind of helped smooth that out. So last year when I was getting this launched, everyone's like, what are you doing that for? You can sell your gas for $8.
Yeah.
Like this year, it's like, so tell me about that Bitcoin thing again. So it's you'll see more and more producers, I think, come around to having this as, it's not going to be probably for most people, not all of their sales.
Right.
But to sell some of your gas to yourself for the purpose of mining Bitcoin just makes a lot of sense, because with Bitcoin at 20, I'm kind of realizing a $7 number on that gas only goes up, and I'm not having to realize that. If I'm more bullish on Bitcoin, I can pocket that.
Yeah, and I think, with what's going on this week with the banking situation, and people are having more and more of a sense of what counterparty risk actually means, and the fixed supply of Bitcoin, and maybe taking a step back from the volatility day to day to looking at, like you said, a digital energy store of value. I'm wondering if that might also open up the mind to adoption, right? It's not just some magic internet money, it's a waste of energy, but no, it's a capacity to store the value of a day's labor.
Yeah, and a day's gas production, which is impossible to store physically.
Right.
Oil, you kind of have, and even that on a practical basis, you have tanks. So you're storing a few days of production, maybe a few weeks of production.
Yeah.
But you're really a price taker. When the truck shows up to haul it off, that's the price you get that day. In the case of a pipeline, the day it goes in the pipeline, the 10-minute terms of the contract. Sometimes it's sold just the price is set for the entire month at the first of the month. Sometimes you get a daily price. It depends. But you're a price taker because you have no place to put it.
Yeah.
I can run it through the generator, produce a little Bitcoin. Now I've got a place to put it.
And send it all over the world if you were to sell it.
If you were to sell it.
What would you say to someone in oil and gas that's playing with the idea?
Everyone's looked at it.
Have they?
Yes.
They're just not talking about it?
No, and they just haven't done it. So it's funny because, I mean, these are all smart guys. And they've all looked at it. What oil and gas guys get hung up on is the price forecast and just the DCF economics on a mining operation.
Okay.
Because it always looks kind of marginal. And so oil and gas project evaluation, you can plug in the strip, and that's going to give you, strip's a horrible price predictor, by the way.
Okay.
It's the worst. It's as bad as anybody. But it gives you some comfort because I can put that in my spreadsheet. And I can look at the strip pricing. And if I wanted to go hedge that and lock that in, theoretically I can. So that gives guys comfort.
Well, and now with derivative products coming online,
so
with
that'll help a lot
Luxor.
that'll help a lot with Bitcoin. But right now, if you go look at a Bitcoin strip, it's going to be flat. And maybe it'll see out for 18 months. But
Okay.
beyond that, the liquidity falls apart. And it's like, there's not a reliable market yet.
Right.
But so you're going to run your economics on flat pricing. And then you have the whole network dynamics. So that's another parallel to oil and gas. Once you launch a Bitcoin mine, your production is going to start declining because of network competition. And then you've got downtime and all the stuff you have to factor in. So when you run a spreadsheet DCF on Bitcoin mining, it always looks kind of crappy.
Okay.
What oil and gas guys have to get comfortable with is having a little bit bullish long-term look at Bitcoin pricing and be in a position where they don't have to take that flat pricing today. So if I take that DCF model, hold back some percentage, 60%, 100% of my Bitcoin, and sell it in the future with a modest price escalator, call it 10%,
Right.
then the economics work.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, they kind of blow up on the upside. But oil and gas guys get hung up on just the DCF cash flow. That always freaks them out. And don't get me started on the halving. They freak right out about that.
They do?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Reduce supply. They're worried that.
As a miner, it's reduced production, right?
Oh,
So my production is
yes.
already declining
Right.
because of the
Okay.
network dynamics. And then in 18 months, it's going to get cut in half.
Yeah.
So that freaks people right out.
Is there more incentive for them to just sell their gas to a different miner rather than having to flare it?
Yeah. So the beauty as an oil and gas operator, you've got an asset in the form of cheap fuel. If you're flaring it, you set the price with the miner. You negotiate that. Or if you're in a horrible gas market, like the Rockies, maybe worse than me. It's close. Or
More fringe.
yeah. Or Waha, then yes, you can negotiate with at sub $2 or really kind of sub $2.50. That's a gas price that gets most miners' attention. Because here's some very quick, simple math or rules of thumb. $1 per MCF is about a penny of kWh for power.
kWh,
Kilowatt hour.
hours. Okay.
So
Okay.
So $2 is 2 cents a kilowatt hour for the fuel. Still got to have a generator.
Yes. You still got to put the equipment and
And you
the
got to
boxes.
and a generator.
You're
So
gonna be
that,
mining,
just looking at the power side, forget the data center.
Sure.
So that generator, fully capitalized and all that operating costs, is going to be about 1.5 to 2 cents a kWh.
Yeah.
Just to buy it, own it, run it. So that's, with $2 gas, I'm at about 3.5 to 4 cents.
Sure.
You're pretty competitive with grid at that point.
Oh, you absolutely are.
So if you're in a sub $2 gas environment, you get Bitcoin miners' attention.
Oh, very much.
So as a producer, the mining's cool. Maybe I just want to entice someone to do that use my flare. Absolutely. Sell them gas for 50 cents, 75 cents,
Yeah.
20 cents.
Yeah.
I'm getting something for it. If it's gas that I have a market, but my market's only $2, or in the case of Waha today, about $1.40.
Yeah.
Then you can still induce a miner to come in and mine on your gas. make them pay a little bit of a premium. You know,
Right.
there's other things you can kind of enhance.
But it's still very profitable for the miner.
Correct.
Because, I mean, some of the most competitive hosting places right now are 7.5, 8 cents,
Yep.
8.5 cents.
Which is tough as a miner to take that
Oh,
number.
absolutely. Yeah.
So that's why last year, as a miner in an $8 gas environment, my power cost was like 10 cents with the gas. But the other secret little thing is I'm selling the gas to myself, right? So I'm vertically integrated.
Right.
So I pay taxes on that. I settled taxes, and we haven't talked about royalties.
Let's
Settled
talk
royalties
a little
on
about
that.
royalties. Yeah.
But as a vertically integrated miner, I'm selling the gas to my mining operation. Mm-hmm. And so it's, when the upstream's doing well, the production side is doing well. The mining is kind of lousy, but when the production's sucking due to low gas prices, my mining operation improves. Mm-hmm. So that vertical integration is hard to do as a small producer. It's almost impossible. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin mining lets you vertically integrate and hedge. I have an internal hedge on gas prices because I'm a buyer over here. Mm-hmm. But royalties, that's one thing that, and flare guys have to be cognizant of royalties and taxes to the state. Most states.
Severance tax. So we
Correct.
talk about has that actually come into play? Severance taxes are a little bit. We're working on a bill right now in Texas
Right,
to make sure that it's clear there shouldn't be any severance tax, and it's had a lot of great reception at the Capitol. Just got out of committee, and I think Giga and Griffin went down there, and they're like, "What are you doing here? What's the bad thing about it? This is excellent." But I wasn't sure if it actually was being done, that people were being taxed severance tax.
They should be. I mean, it's, and I don't know. I haven't really peeled back the lid on anyone else's flare operations, but the way it ought to be done, you're buying that gas. There's a sale of that gas from one party to another somewhere in the contract, depending on how it's structured.
Severance separation from, in your case, the state of New Mexico to go somewhere else.
Right. So, and then there's a royalty owner who's sitting there. That's his mineral rights that are being
mineral
produced. And so they're due a royalty on that production. Mm-hmm. In the simple case of a flare gas, as long as there's a price that's set between the whoever's burning the gas and whoever's producing it, and there should be, and that price may only be 20 cents. But royalties and taxes should get settled on some price.
Sure.
If they're not, you just open yourself up to someone to come back and contest that. And you can argue where the gas because it's burned, right? But it's got value. Mm-hmm. So it's not zero. Mm-hmm. It's something. So is it 20 cents? Or is it 50 cents? That's a legitimate debate to have. But it's not zero. So if anyone's doing it around a zero number, they're just kind of asking for trouble. Potentially.
Now, what about pitfalls to watch out for? Do you have any horror stories of setting this up, or
Yes.
was it easy?
It's like everything. It's an easy concept, but
Yeah.
the execution is challenging.
What have you learned along the way, or what stories do you have for us?
So fortunately, I did a deal. So back to the cycles, right? So when I was getting started, ASICs were readily available, but they were expensive. Data centers were long lead times. Mm-hmm. 2 to 3, 4 months.
Yeah.
Generators were easier to come by, but so data centers were the long lead time. So I bought 2 on order. Ended up trading one of mine from order with some guys who had one in exchange for letting them park some miners with me and they helped me do the initial setup. So that was great. PA Ventures in Dallas, good guy, super good guys. And they're mining different places on grid and not flare, some other stranded gas stuff. So they helped me with the initial setup. The biggest pitfall for me is generator selection. So getting a suitable one, and if you're self-funded or just cheap, you're going to be drawn to used equipment.
Thrifty.
So yeah, thrifty. Used equipment is just a hard market to navigate unless you're a real specialist. And
Okay.
the
Like
generator
buying a
world,
used car
it's worse.
salesman.
I mean, used car, when you look at a used car lot, that's the car on the lot. You talk to generator guys, they might have 3 of them selling the same generator that's parked, sitting somewhere. It's not all unscrupulous, but there's plenty of challenges navigating that market. So I got a little snake bit on my generator, and then the container we have is great, and they all have air cooled. You're going to have an air filtration system on it.
Right.
Well, I'm in New Mexico. I grew up in West Texas, so I'm not
Not too far from home.
I'm not unfamiliar with sandstorms. I've seen a number.
Yeah.
So the day after we had just gotten everything running and everything installed, and I'm leaving the location, there's like a 40-mile-an-hour wind blowing out of the southwest, and it's sandstorm
Oh, wow.
like crazy. And we hadn't adequately, it has filters in place, but they really need to be taped in well and really sealed up, and we didn't do that. So we got a lot of sand in that first blast. So it's just a lot of little things like that. And then we'd already upgraded the internet, but internet reliability, you don't need to have great internet.
Do you need a lot of internet?
You don't need a lot of bandwidth, but you got to have a pretty reliable connection.
Okay.
So we ended up on a cellular modem, which works great in most places, and we finally got ours tuned up fine. But the networking side of it, which was all new to me, these guys were able to help with. We've kind of upgraded that since. And then with the advent of Starlink, when we started, Starlink wasn't available where I am, or they weren't advertising it as available. So we're about to install Starlink so we'll have a cellular redundant and then Starlink. But that's guys who've used Starlink, say it works great. So it's just little things about all the execution on making sure you got your container running right, making sure you have really good electricians hooking up your generator, which we did, making sure you bought a good generator, which we didn't really.
But you live and you learn.
You live and you learn. And everything's, and the other, so it's all great getting stuff set up, but maintenance is huge.
Yeah. So do you hire people to assist, or did you have those skills?
I did not have those skills. First to the generator. Depending on where you are, finding a mechanic that can work on your specific type of engine is critical. So when you buy the generator, you should really have that maintenance in mind.
And how often does it need to be maintained?
So you have a PM oil change, which is a little bit more complicated than a standard car oil change. They do a little bit more stuff. Really once a month if you're running 24/7, every 750 hours on most engines. So you've got to have mechanics, techs who can do that work on your unit, and they have to be available. So where the oil field and Bitcoin mining intersect for capital equipment competition, and mate is at the generator.
Very interesting.
So that's a critical component, that selection. That's where the Giga guys have done an excellent job controlling that part of the value chain.
Because they use the generators themselves, and
so they have their own internal shop to rebuild them. And
well, I'm imagining, so if we can colonize the oil fields for Bitcoin mining, and you had generators everywhere, you could really start a business of someone that knew that equipment and visit it, make the rotation. But it sounds like right now you're an isolated case out there in the fringe of the fringe.
So I've luckily recruited a great guy who runs a team of mechanics. They work on compressors.
Wow.
But it's the same kind of engines. So they're Caterpillar specialists. So I've fortunately been able to cultivate that relationship. So the biggest pitfall for an off-grid gas guy is the generator, making sure you select the right one for your application, a good one, and you have, more importantly, or as importantly, an eye and a plan for the maintenance of it.
Wow.
The rest of it is, your data center, they've all gotten a lot better, but I've looked at a bunch of them on the front end.
They're much more similar.
Yeah, they've gotten a lot more, because it's all kind of the same problem, right? It's not, so they've kind of gotten a little more commoditized, a little more generic, and depending on your application, the filter system's like critical. or it is for that's my biggest problem is on the filter side. So making sure you understand how that works, or because you're going to have to change them a lot.
Yeah.
And just make sure you've got and a lot of people early on, and some guys still kind of do it, put a lot of bells and whistles on that aren't really necessary. Mm-hmm. It's cool. I mean, it's really...
Yes, I've seen that.
It's really cool to have
It looks like a spaceship, but it mines just as well as a simple one over there.
And, there's some great guys in Tulsa, Wampum Mining on Twitter. They launched a mine off-grid pipeline gas on a CBM field that they owned. I went up and looked at theirs, and it's everything they bought. They built it out themselves. Everything came from Home Depot. And it's just like, it doesn't have to be fancy.
Right. It doesn't. I mean, it just needs to mine Bitcoin.
It's a place for the little computers to sit and for the air to flow through.
So, yeah, a little easier to get the data boxes, but the generators...
Hard. So that's...
where, Giga Energy is mining themselves and they're producing them. And they can daisy chain them, but they're smaller projects, more like yours,
Right.
1 megawatt, 5 megawatt, but you can pile a bunch on. Is there really anywhere else that you can get that kind of stuff?
Then you're just into the generator market, right?
Okay.
And that's,
if you know generators, you can
Caterpillar, Waukesha. And again, your big competition for that stuff, especially on the natural gas fired, is the oil field. The oil field uses these.
They want those as well.
Yeah. So they're out running submersible pumps on new oil wells that they drilled. So that's a big power, and they're off, they're out in the middle of nowhere where there's no co-op or power supply. So they have to, and they only do that for a phase of the well's life, maybe the first year.
Okay.
But they're consuming a lot of these, and they may do them.
Will they sell their equipment after that first year, or can you get them at a discount?
Maybe, and they may be renting it. And that's the rental market for these things has gone to the point where it's just not economic for a miner to rent generators.
Yeah.
Early on it was, when Bitcoin was higher and the oil field was at a lull, but now you really just can't afford to. I got quoted a rate the other day that equates to 12.5 cents a kWh just for the generator rental.
Oh my goodness, that's
before you start.
Add that to your power price, add that to your equipment. It's not profitable.
Right. So rental markets just price it. Long-term lease to own. That's just another financing vehicle. That's maybe more doable. I haven't looked at that lately. But Mesa Power Equipment, or I don't know what the official name is, they make some oil field generators. They make a lot of them. It's just getting in the market and finding something that works for you.
Well, Dan, it sounds like it's been quite an adventure, and you've learned a lot along the way. Have you ever considered doing consulting? So if someone is listening or watching and they think, hey, maybe I can do that, do you do consulting? Can they give you a call and you walk them through the process?
Happy to walk them through the process to whatever degree of involvement they want me involved in. I give a lot of free information.
It's kind of the Bitcoin spirit, but it sounds like you've really created a niche for yourself of having been a one-man show and developing this yourself, and would have very valuable, people would save themselves a lot of time and a lot of money by hiring your services rather than making the mistakes themselves.
Yeah, I'd be happy to let people profit from my mistakes. So I'm at Sludge LLC on Twitter.
Okay, is that the best way to get
That's the easiest
in contact
way.
with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. People can find me. Amalgamated Sludge is out there.
Excellent. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure.
For sharing. It's great information, and looking forward to continuing the conversation at the next meetup.
Yes. Now, I would encourage people to go to the meetups. If you're curious, that's the best way to, my first meetup was the Houston one. And I'm not.
Really? You live in this area,
right.
though.
I live in
Do you
Plano.
go down to the Houston meetup?
When it works out with something else that I'm
I know,
in
I've
town
seen
for.
you down there.
Yeah, there's usually, I've got some other reason to be in Houston. So I'll try to, chain that together. But people should just get out and go to the meetups. The first one I went to, I'd met or had a conversation with Gideon through an oil and gas.
Gideon Powell.
Yeah, through an oil and gas introduction. And so I was following him on Twitter. And he makes some post about, meet up in Houston tonight. I was like, I should go do that.
Yeah.
So it was day of. And it's like, get in my car at noon and go to Houston. But it was worthwhile.
I don't know if this has been your experience, but the Bitcoin mining, the Bitcoin community in general are fascinating people, right? Because they're paying attention to the world and economics and they're thinking about life. But then the the Bitcoin miners, the oil and gas, it's an even more niche community, and I think more tight knit. And a lot of the energy, pun intended, with that community is they're not necessarily looking for their place. Sometimes when you're in the Bitcoin space and you want to just be in this space, but you got your day job and you got to figure out how to make this profitable. So you're trying to figure out a way to monetize this while still being true to the whole Bitcoin ethos, which is value for value. Everyone's kind of giving away everything that they've got for free because everybody's number goes up if Bitcoin goes up. But with the mining community, they're just doing their thing, head down, and a real camaraderie and a lot of the experience on oil and gas, which again is unique. So, and also I tell women too, because there's not a lot of women in the space. It's such a fun space. It's like a family that there's a chance to get together every month. So
it's, I stopped by someone's mining operation in West Texas on my last trip out to our field.
Okay.
And, saw what they were doing. So it's just like, and I was able to go, wouldn't do that. I should fix it. Because I've done, I've seen the same thing.
Did they receive it well?
Oh yeah, no,
it's huge gift.
I'm pointing out problems they know they have. It's like
right.
It's kind of once you have the problem, it gets pretty obvious on that you have the problem. You need to fix it.
But to have a solution.
Well, but just to commiserate a little bit also with people, over solutions and stuff. It's always helpful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and look forward to the next conversation.
Yep, anytime.
And thank you to all our listeners. If you would like more of this kind of content, please like, follow, and subscribe to be alerted for our next interview.